Sitting on my right side is Mr. John Cushnahan. Mr. John Cushnahan is a former member of European Parliament, and he has been he headed the election observer mission of European Union in 2002, and that was a very extraordinary kind of assignment at that time because a military government was holding the elections, and his job was very delicate, and he spoke very eloquently and very frankly about what he saw during the elections. I think more will come from his side. Sitting on my left is Senator Taj Haider. He belongs to Pakistan People's Party, and he's a veteran parliamentarian. He has a long experience on electoral matters. He chaired the Parliamentary Committee on Parliamentary Affairs, which was holding hearings on electoral reforms for a number of months before that was unfortunately wrapped up. And also joining online with us is Mr. Bilal Azhar Kayani, member of National Assembly. He belongs to Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, and he will be sharing his perspective with us on electoral reforms. Just a few words before I ask my panelists to kindly share their views. I may be repeating some of the things which I said in yesterday's session, but because it's so relevant, what I want to basically focus on in Pakistan over the past elections, first election after the 1973 Constitution in 1977, and since then we have seen total 11 elections taking place, and during this period we have introduced a number of electoral reforms through various national assemblies, various senates, and some of them are very important and far-reaching. For example, we have also introduced the electoral reform that election commission will be appointed through a bipartisan consensus of the political parties in the parliament. And this is something remarkable because India had been struggling with it for a long time, and they have not been able to do that. They are still appointing the election commission through basically discretion of the Prime Minister, but lately the judiciary role has been also introduced. But in Pakistan it has been written in the constitution, and it's a bipartisan process. Pakistan has also introduced a identification card, computerized national identification card, as a means of registering as a voter and then casting as a voter. And that has eliminated the possibility of impersonating as a voter. And that has also helped us in cleaning our electoral rolls, which used to have multiple entries in the electoral rolls, but now with the introduction of CNIC as a condition, that has been almost reduced to a negligible level. So similarly, the number of reforms have been introduced in the past, but sadly, despite all these efforts, we have almost never been able to hold an election whose credibility was not questioned. तो हमारे यहाँ इंतखाबात के बारे में ये सवालात उठाए जाते रहे हैं, और हमेशा मुख्तलिफ सियासी पार्टियाँ, अवाम, मीडिया, स्टेक होल्डर्स, इंटरनेशनल कम्युनिटी वो ये समझती है कि ये इंतखाबात सही नहीं हुए, इसके अंदर धांधली हुई है। बाज़ औक़ात ये बहुत बड़े पैमाने पे होती है, बाज़ औक़ात ज़रा निस्बतन कम पैमाने पे होती है, लेकिन एक सिस्टमिक इशू है जो मौजूद है। 1985 में करने का तरीका ये था कि गैर जमाती बुनियादों पे इलेक्शन करवाए गए ताकि एक पार्टी को इलेक्शन से बाहर रखा जाए। पीपल्स पार्टी जो जीतने वाली थी वो नहीं जीत सकी। 1988 में जो सियासी जमातें थीं उनका इत्तेहाद बनाया गया इसलिए कि पीपल्स पार्टी जो जीतने का इम्कान रखती थी उसको ना जीतना दिया जाए। 1990 में इंटेलिजेंस एजेंसी के सरबराह के एक एफिडेविट के मुताबिक उन्होंने पैसे एक बैंकों से लेके मुखालिफ पार्टियों में तकसीम किए ताकि पीपल्स पार्टी इलेक्शन ना जीत सके। इसी तरह से 2002 में जो कैंडिडेट्स थे उनके लिए भी इंटेलिजेंस एजेंसियों ने काम किया कि उनकी सिलेक्शन कैसे होनी चाहिए। 2018 में जो इलेक्शन हुए उस पर प्री पोल इतनी हैवी रिगिंग हुई और एक पार्टी को एलिमिनेट किया गया। 2024 में भी यही चीज़ दोहराई गई, लेकिन पार्टियां बदल गईं। तो ये एक सिस्टमेटिक तरीके के साथ पाकिस्तान में, बावजूद इसके कि हमारा कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, हमारे इंतखाबी कवानीन, हमारा इंतखाबी सिस्टम दुनिया के किसी भी इंतखाबी सिस्टम के मुकाबले में रखा जा सकता है, लेकिन उसका रिज़ल्ट अच्छा नहीं रहा। तो अब सवाल ये पैदा होता है कि पाकिस्तान में ऐसा क्या किया जाए कि हमारे इंतखाबी निज़ाम की सैंक्टिटी पैदा हो जाए, उसके ऊपर लोगों का एतमाद पैदा हो जाए, और जो काम हमने माजी में किया है उससे हम पीछे हट जाएं और हमारा इंतखाबी निज़ाम के नतीजे में फिर पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम में भी इस्तेकाम आ जाए। सो जॉन, यू हैड observed the election in 2002, and I remember interacting with you at that time. I'm privileged to interacting with you since then for a number of occasions. And you had, at that time, generally when observer missions come, they use very diplomatic language, and it is very difficult to decipher what exactly they are saying. But you had been very forthright, and you had been calling a spade a spade. So what is your experience as a member of European parliamentarian and as an election observer mission who observed an election in Pakistan and observed 4 elections in Sri Lanka? So you have a long experience, so please, if you can use the podium and enlighten us, what can we do to improve our electoral process? Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, members of the audience and people viewing from outside this hall, I'm very honoured to have been invited to this particular conference, which of course is in the memory of Asma Jahangir, who was I regret that I never met her on my visits to Pakistan. She was a very inspirational person, a very courageous person who achieved many things in her life. And I was also pleased that I had the opportunity to meet her 2 daughters and her husband. At this time in the world, many countries in conflict where human rights are abused need more Asma Jahangirs to defend human rights. And probably the most important one at this point in time is in Israel, where if there was someone like Asma Jahangir that might persuade the Israeli government to stop murdering innocent civilians in Gaza. There has to be a solution to that problem, but it has to be a peaceful one. I was pleased, Mr. Moderator, to come here in 2002. And what inspired me to take a very frank response is that I greatly admired those courageous people in Pakistan who defended human rights in civil society and also in the media. And I was particularly conscious that in the media in the last 10 years, 150 journalists who tried to reveal what was happening in Pakistan were murdered. On the 30th of April 2002, President Musharraf held a referendum seeking endorsement for an extension of his rule for a further 5 years. The referendum was seen by many critics, including myself, as a departure from the roadmap for the restoration of democracy. Possibly in an attempt to assuage international opinion and assure the international community that the roadmap was on course. General Musharraf invited EU Commissioner Chris Patten to send an election observation team for the 2002 October general election. He asked me to lead that 164-strong team. When I was a politician in Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom, I led the Alliance Party. The Alliance Party was the only party in Northern Ireland that had both sections of our divided community voting for it. Chris Patten was a British minister in Northern Ireland at that point in time, so he knew I would not be afraid to come to places like Pakistan and Sri Lanka and do what is right. And I thank him for that. However, when I arrived in Islamabad in August 2002, I was met with a hostile reaction. I can only guess as to the possible reasons. I suppose it wasn't helped by the fact that I had strongly criticised General Musharraf's sham presidential election. When we met the Pakistan authorities following our arrival, we were informed that there would be no formal invitation, no memorandum of understanding, no security protection for our team. Additionally, we also received a hostile response from the then Pakistan Election Commissioner. I suppose it was no coincidence that he had been on the Supreme Court judge. He was a Supreme Court judge who had conferred legitimacy on Musharraf's coup. Things then went from bad to worse. Just over a week after arrival, I was personally attacked in what can only be considered racist terms.
Can you speak closer to the mic?
Speak.
Closer to the mic, yeah.
In 4 simultaneous speeches given by 4 government ministers in each of Pakistan's 4 provinces, I was called a Western white who came from a country with hostile attitudes to Pakistan. I was also charged by another of interfering in Pakistan politics. When I challenged that particular minister subsequently at a face-to-face meeting to justify his comments, his response was extremely revealing. He said it was because we arrived too early. We arrived too early in the country to observe the election. Implicit in this comment was that our unexpected early arrival meant that we would catch them in the process of rigging that particular election. They wanted us to arrive in polling day and everything would be arranged perfectly. Thankfully, we came some months earlier. EU ambassadors to member states were not enamoured with our presence. Many did not want us to rock the boat with General Musharraf for a number of reasons, including the imminent possibility of an outbreak of war with Iraq and the US. Others because they represent countries that had strong trading relationships with Pakistan. In coming to an overall assessment of the 2002 election based on the 7 internationally accepted criteria for determining that an election process had been free and fair, our team came to very clear conclusions, as the moderator has pointed out. In particular, we concluded that there was unjustified interference with electoral arrangements and the democratic process, which prevented Pakistan's major political figures, including Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif, from contesting the election. The Pakistan authorities had therefore engaged in a course of action which inevitably resulted in serious flaws in the electoral process. Additionally, we pointed out that the restoration of power from a military to a civilian administration should have been about the transfer of power from a military to a civilian administration. The powers that had been reserved to the President and the National Security Council, in our view, raised serious questions as to whether or not this would happen. 3 days after we published our report on the election's flaws, the EU presidency, on behalf of all member states, issued a joint declaration in Brussels on the Pakistan election. In it, a number of things annoyed me, but one in particular. An EU election observer mission monitored the elections and issued a statement on its preliminary findings on the 12th of October 2002. The European Union commends the Pakistani authorities for their cooperation with the EU observer mission. That was totally false. I was furious at these comments. I considered their remarks to be a betrayal of the work that we did in very dangerous circumstances, and told them so. There was no political will in the part of the EU Council and the Commission to act on our conclusions, despite the fact that the EU had indeed the capacity to take action, because there is a strong emphasis on human rights and democracy in the EC partnership and cooperation agreements, and human rights clauses are included in all of these agreements with third countries in Clause 1. Fortunately, I could, because by sheer coincidence in January 2002, the European Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee had also appointed me as a rapporteur for the EU-Pakistan Third Generation Agreement. So when I returned from Pakistan, I blocked that agreement. I held it on hold and was supported by Commissioner Chris Patton, my parliamentary colleagues and democratic forces in this country. Unfortunately, I was to be disappointed 2 years later when, after massive lobbying by member states and members of the EU Commission at the time, they persuaded my colleagues on the Foreign Affairs Committee to change their mind. So in a debate in the last term of that Parliament, the recommendation to approve the agreement between the EU and Pakistan, it was passed very narrowly. But I had also been asked to do, because of the guilt of my colleagues and not maintaining their support for what I was doing, to do a report on the abuse of human rights. That report was passed unanimously by the Parliament. So you had a decision, two votes, which were total contradictory.
I'm sorry for interruption, John, but you have got one more minute, yeah.
I didn't want my name to be associated with the approval of the agreement, and I resigned the rapporteurship. My feelings were mollified to some extent, and I'll finish on this point, Moderator, when the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, sent me a 2-page letter which he published not only in Pakistan but internationally, and I'll quote 2 paragraphs from it. I write to thank you for the support you have valiantly and persistently rendered to the cause of human rights and democratic principles of Pakistan. The democratic forces in Pakistan are disappointed to learn that a democratic crusader who stood up for the disempowered people of Pakistan is no longer an EU rapporteur. We may have lost a great supporter of the cause of human rights and democracy, but you have inspired many others and illuminated the path for them to tread. That was the warmest letter I have received from many international leaders, and I thank her family who are watching this for the support she had always given me. So, shukriya.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you. बिलाल अज़हर कयानी जो पाकिस्तान मुस्लिम लीग नवाज़ के रुकन कौमी असम्बली हैं, उनसे गुजारिश है कि वो हमें ये बताएं कि उनका और उनकी पार्टी की क्या राय है कि पाकिस्तान के अंदर इंतखाबी अमल के ऊपर लोगों का एतमाद क्यों नहीं है और क्या किया जा सकता है कि पाकिस्तान में इंतखाबी अमल के ऊपर एतमाद बहाल हो, सियासी जमातें नताइज को कबूल करें। तो ओवर टू यू बिलाल अज़हर कयानी साहब, यू हैव 7 मिनट्स।
जी बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। अहमद साहब बहुत शुक्रिया जी, thank you for giving me the chance to speak. And at the outset, I would like to firstly thank the conference organizers for inviting me, for giving me a chance to speak here. And I would also like to apologize that I can't be there in person. Ji, I really wanted to attend in person, but family में एक overnight एक close relative की death हुई है जी. I have to attend the janaza, and logistically it wouldn't have been possible. That's why I'm participating online. अहमद साहब बहुत शुक्रिया जी, आपने 7 मिनट दिए हैं. मैं कोशिश करूंगा कि I'll try and conclude well before that. It'll also allow more time for Q&A. But before and as part of answering your question, मैं थोड़ा सा एक बैकग्राउंड पेश करना चाहूँगा जी. मैं ये ज़रूर फिर से एज अ प्रीकर्सर हाईलाइट करना चाहूँगा कि मेरी भी जो मालूमात में थोड़ा बहुत ओवर द ईयर्स इजाफा हुआ है रिगार्डिंग इलेक्टोरल रिफॉर्म्स, उसमें खुद अहमद साहब और उनकी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का भी काफ़ी हाथ रहा है. इन्होंने पिलडैट ने कुछ सेशंस किए थे जो मुझे अटेंड करने का मौका मिला, जिसमें वो कुरैशी साहब भी जो आज अनफॉर्चुनेटली ड्यू टू दैट मेडिकल इमरजेंसी कुडंट बी हियर, उनकी भी ब्रीफिंग हमने उधर ली. तो मैं कुछ खुलासा पेश करना चाहूँगा कि 2017 کی جو الیکشنز ایکٹ تھی اس میں اور جس کے تحت ابھی الیکشنز ہوتے ہیں، جس کے تحت اب الیکشنز کا سارا عمل ہوتا ہے اور جس میں الیکشن کمیشن کی پاورز ڈیفائنڈ ہے، وہ اٹ سیلف فرام اے لیجسلیٹو پوائنٹ آف ویو ایک کافی بڑا مارکا تھا، ایک اسٹیپ فارورڈ تھا پاکستان کی الیکٹورل ریفارمز میں۔ 3 سال پہ محیط یہ پروسیس ہوئی تھی، جولائی 2014 سے جولائی 2017 تک یہ پروسیس 3 سال لگے تھے اس پارلیمنٹری کمیٹی آن الیکٹورل ریفارمز فار الیکٹورل ریفارمز کو کہ وہ اپنا کام مکمل کرے۔ احمد صاحب، if you don't mind, do you mind if I speak in Urdu or English, or it doesn't matter either way?
As convenient, Bilal Saab, up to you. اردو انگریزی
جی جی، چلیں
چاہیں بول لیں.
چلیں تھوڑا سا مکس میں جاری رکھوں گا جی۔ تو اس میں جی آپ نے ذکر کیا تاج حیدر صاحب بھی آپ کے ساتھ بیٹھے ہوئے ہیں، he will also be able to perhaps provide more color, but he was part of that process as you highlighted at the outset. تو تقریباً 3 سالوں میں اوور دا کورس آف 3 years 125 میٹنگز آف دیٹ کمیٹی اینڈ سب کمیٹیز ور ہیلڈ۔ اس میں اکراس دا بورڈ اس ٹائم پہ بھی ہماری پی ایم ایل این واز ان پاور اینڈ واز ڈرائیونگ دس پروسیس، بٹ آل پارٹیز فرام دا اپوزیشن ور انکلوڈیڈ، ایون دو باہر دھرنے بھی ہو رہے تھے، دیگر چیزیں چل رہی تھیں، بٹ ایٹ دا پارلیمنٹری لیول، ایٹ دس ورکنگ لیول، اٹ واز اے ویری انکلوسیو پروسیس، جس کے نتیجے میں اور اس میں ساری آپ کی سول سوسائٹی اور پاکستان بار کاؤنسل، ساری لائرز باڈی، سپریم کورٹ بار ایسوسیشن، ہائی کورٹ بار ایسوسیشن، سب شامل تھیں۔ تو یہ سب چیزیں 3 سال لگے اور ایک بڑا کمپریہنسو لا الیکشنز ایکٹ کے نتیجے میں کی صورت میں سامنے آیا، جو کہ 8 لاز کو امیلگمیٹ کر کے مرج کر کے یہ بنایا گیا تھا، اور اس میں کافی پاورز الیکشن کمیشن کو دی گئی تھیں۔ تو کافی حد تک جو لیجسلیشن کا کام ہے، میرا خیال ہے جی اس میں کافی کنسنسس کے ساتھ، انکلوڈنگ اپوزیشن، انکلوڈنگ ای سی پیز پوائنٹ آف ویو، انکلوڈنگ سم ویری تھرو ورکنگ اینڈ ویوز فرام ایکسپرٹس، اس کو شامل کر کے کام مکمل کیا گیا تھا۔ تو جہاں تک تو آئی تھنک الیکشنز کے ہماری پروسیس ان دا لا کی بات ہے، میرے خیال سے جی کافی اس میں اب بہتری آئی بھی ہے اور کافی وہ اسٹرانگ پروسیس ہے۔ اس میں پھر مزید 2 سوالات اٹھائے گئے، یا اس میں مزید 2 جو پروپوزلز جو خاص طور پہ پیش کیے گئے اس کے بعد آفٹر 2018 الیکشنز میں بھی آر ٹی ایس کا ایک بڑا ایشو تھا، یقیناً ہماری مائی پارٹی ایٹ دا ٹائم and even now felt کہ the election process we had our reservations. I don't want to go into that detail, but ابھی اس آفٹر 2018 2 اور پرپوزل آئے تھے، جس کے اوپر میں ایک پوائنٹ آف ویو بھی پیش کرنا چاہوں گا اور ایک بیک گراؤنڈ بھی ضرور رکھنا چاہوں گا۔ ایک تو الیکٹرانک ووٹنگ مشینز پہ بات ہوئی تھی، اور ایک اوورسیز پاکستانیز کے ووٹنگ کے اوپر بات ہوئی تھی، جس کے اوپر ایک لا بھی آفٹر 2018 لایا گیا تھا، جو کہ in my personal view was not a very inclusive way of bringing the law. Even the election commission had their reservations, and I don't think it was as inclusive a process as had been seen for prior to the promulgation of the Elections Act 2017. وہ پھر ایونچولی ریورس ہو گئی تھی، جو بعد میں امینڈمنٹ آئی تھی ریگارڈنگ ای وی ایمز، اینڈ آئی بلیو اس میں شاید انٹرنیٹ ووٹنگ بھی شامل تھی۔ مگر ان دونوں باتوں کو اگر میں انٹرن ذرا بیک گراؤنڈ بھی پیش کر دوں، چونکہ الیکٹرانک ووٹنگ مشین پہ بہت بات ہوتی ہے، تو یہ ضرور ہائی لائٹ کرنا ضروری ہے کہ الیکٹرانک ای وی ایمز جو ہیں، الیکٹرانک ووٹنگ مشینز جو ہیں، وہ دنیا میں ابھی صرف 8 ممالک میں استعمال ہو رہی ہیں، اور 9 ممالک ایسے ہیں جو کہ اس کو استعمال کر کے اس کو ڈسکارڈ کر چکے ہیں، مطلب کہ دے آر نو لانگر یوزنگ ای وی ایمس، اینڈ دین آئی تھنک دیر آر 2 or 3 کنٹریز دیٹ آر ایکسپیریمنٹنگ۔ تو میں یہ ضرور کہنا چاہوں گا کہ آؤٹ آف دا آئی تھنک اراؤنڈ 167 شاید ایک رف نمبر ہے جو میں نے دیکھا ہے آف ڈیموکریسیز اور سیلف پروکلیم ڈیموکریسیز in the world, only 8 are using EVMs, and those include the United States, India, ایسٹونیا، نمیبیا، فلپینز، برازیل، منگولیا اور کرگستان۔ اسی طرح اگر آپ ان ممالک کا نام دیکھ لیں جو کہ ای وی ایمس کو استعمال کر کے اب چھوڑ چکے ہیں، انہوں نے کنٹریز دیٹ اڈاپٹیڈ الیکٹرانک ووٹنگ مشینز اینڈ دین اسٹاپڈ یوزنگ دیم، دوز انکلوڈ جرمنی، فرانس، آئرلینڈ، ارجنٹینا، ناروے، ڈیموکریٹک ریپبلک آف کانگو، پیراگوائے، عراق اینڈ دا نیدرلینڈس۔ So these are countries that adopted it and decided not to use it. तो पॉइंट इज कि ये दुनिया में कोई आम चीज नहीं है, ये दुनिया में भी एक अनोमली है, और अब भी उसके ऊपर सवालात होते हैं. दूसरी बात ये है, और ये इसके ऊपर अगेन आई थिंक कुरैशी साहब यहाँ पे अगर हमारे आज ज्वाइन कर सकते होते तो मुझे यकीन है वो इस पे मजीद रोशनी डालते कि इंडिया में भी जो ईवीएम्स का इस्तेमाल है उसका नेशन वाइड इस्तेमाल होते होते उनको तकरीबन इट टुक देम 2 decades to get to a point where they were using EVMs at a national level. I think in the late 80s केरला में उन्होंने पहले
साहब
स्टार्ट
एक
किया,
मिनट है
उसके
आपके
बाद
पास कंक्लूड करने के लिए.
जी sorry जी, I apologize, I'll be very quick. So they also took over 2 decades. They carried out hackathons to test the system, and even now there are questions. Finally, very quickly on the question of overseas voting, again this is a very contentious issue. इसमें मैं ये हाईलाइट करना चाहूंगा कि बाई इलेक्शंस में 2018 में अक्टूबर में एक एक्सपेरिमेंट हो चुकी है जिसमें 35 कंस्टिट्यूएंसीज के ऊपर इंटरनेट वोटिंग हुई थी दुनिया में, पाकिस्तान में, दीगर इन पाकिस्तान इन वेरियस पाकिस्तानी मिशंस अब्रॉड, and it was not, the results were not found to be satisfactory. Ballot secrecy was an issue, voter coercion was easy, auditability के issues आए थे. तो इसके ऊपर ये हमें जरूर सोचना चाहिए कि एक तो ईवीएम्स के ऊपर भी वी शुड टेक अ वेरी कंसिडर्ड अप्रोच. अगर आगे इसको करना भी होगा तो बड़े ग्रेजुअली करना होगा, और ये इस तरीके से नहीं हो सकेगा जिस तरह कोशिश हुई थी. इंटरनेट वोटिंग के ऊपर एक पार्लियामेंट्री डेमोक्रेसी में जहां पे दीगर हलकों के लिए लोग वोट करते हैं प्रेसिडेंशियल इलेक्शन के बजाय, जहां पे एक ही कैंडिडेट होता है, दुनिया में आप जहां से भी वोट करें 2 या 3 कैंडिडेट्स के लिए आप एक ही बैलेट पे वोट करते हैं, यहाँ पे हर वोटर का उसके हल्के के हिसाब से बैलेट फर्क होगा. तो हमें ये देखना होगा कि क्या हम वोटिंग के थ्रू ओवरसीज रिप्रेजेंटेशन करें. अगर वो करें तो क्या ओवरसीज पाकिस्तानीज के अपने कैंडिडेट्स होने चाहिए, या हम ओवरसीज पाकिस्तानीज को रिजर्व सीट्स की सूरत में पार्टीज के थ्रू रिप्रेजेंटेशन दें. आई थिंक इस सब के ऊपर डिलिबरेशन की जरूरत है जी. विद दैट आई विल कंक्लूड, एंड थैंक यू अहमद साहब फॉर गिविंग मी टाइम.
बहुत शुक्रिया बिलाल अजहर कयानी. सेनेटर ताज हैदर साहब, आपके इल्म में है कि पाकिस्तान दुनिया भर में जो वोटर टर्नआउट का डेटाबेस है उसके मुताबिक बॉटम से कोई 6 या 7वें नंबर पे है. ये 150 मुल्कों का डेटाबेस है जो इंटरनेशनल आइडिया ने बना रखा है. और साउथ एशिया में अगर जो 8 मुल्क हैं तो हमारा नंबर 7वां है. 8वां नंबर अफ़गानिस्तान का है, लेकिन वहाँ अब तो इलेक्शन फ़िलहाल हो नहीं रहे. उनका जो एवरेज वोटर टर्नआउट है वो 44.46% है और हमारा 46% है. तो बाकी जो मुल्क हैं, श्रीलंका, नेपाल, मालदीव्स, इंडिया, भूटान, बांग्लादेश, इन सब का वोटर टर्नआउट हमसे ज़्यादा है. तो ये भी एक रिफ्लेक्शन है कि हमारे लोगों वोट नहीं डालते क्योंकि उनको इंतखाबी अमल पे एतमाद नहीं है. तो अब आप ज़रा इस पर रोशनी डालिए कि इतने रिफॉर्म्स हो जाने के बावजूद हम आज जहाँ पे खड़े हैं 2024 के इंतखाबात के ऊपर भी शायद ही कोई सियासी जमात होगी जिसने सवाल ना उठाए हों. तो आप क्या सजेस्ट करते हैं कि अब आइंदा क्या लाए अमल इख्तियार किया जाए, क्या रिफॉर्म किया जाए? वो एक गालिब ने कहा था ना, हो चुकी गालिब बलाएं सब तमाम, एक मर्ग नागहानी और है. तो वो मर्ग नागहानी क्या है अब जो रह गई है, जो हम करें तो हमारे इंतखाबात क्रेडिबल हो सकें? ओवर टू यू सर. आप चाहें तो वहाँ से बोल लें और चाहें तो यहाँ से बोल. यहाँ से चलिए.
शुक्रिया बहुत बहुत. Ladies and gentlemen, things will be much easier to understand if we recognize that there are 2 poles of power in Pakistani society. One is the establishment of Pakistan and the other pole is people of Pakistan. If we understand this contradiction, then we shall also understand why there is dictatorship and why there are small periods of democracy when governments elected by the people of Pakistan take over. Now, then there is a principal contradiction between progressive thinking and extremism. There is a collaboration between the elite of Pakistan, the establishment of Pakistan, and the extremist elements. And that's why people of Pakistan don't have trust in the electoral process, and our electoral turnout is so low. The story of electoral reforms is a long one. There was this People's Act, which of 1951, People's Representation Act, which was replaced in 1976 with the Representation of People Act, which was again replaced in 2017 by the Election Act 2017. But we see that as we move ahead in our legislative process, the powers of the Election Commission of Pakistan have been further strengthened with every step. And the powers of the establishment to rig the elections have been blocked by one method or another. And so our establishment is forced to think of new methods and very innovative methods to rig the elections. We have been experiencing it now and then very often. But I think a landmark reform is that of count of votes. Previously, in the 1976 acts, votes were cast at a polling station, and then the ballot boxes were taken to the office of the returning officers. And on the way, many things happened, and boxes disappeared, and boxes were manipulated, and votes were found on the streets, and those kinds of things. It was none other than Shahid Benazir Bhutto who insisted again and again that the vote count should be on the polling station in the presence of the polling station agents, and whatever the vote count is, it should be displayed outside the polling station so that everybody can see. And then those results of polling stations will be taken to this is the famous Form 45 everybody is talking about. A vote count at the polling station in the presence of polling agents, and the form signed by polling agents. Now, this was a great achievement, and this really pushed back the forces of the establishment and the forces that wanted to rig the elections. And I'm very satisfied to note that today every Pakistani is talking of Form 45 and Form 47. Form 47 is the one where the results obtained at polling stations are put together and added together, and provisional results are announced. Now, many amendments were proposed. In the Election Act 2017, the PTI government brought in about 100 amendments, and they were very surprisingly passed by the National Assembly. And then they came to the Senate of Pakistan, and I had the honor of presiding over the Parliamentary Affairs Committee, which looked on these proposed amendments. There was long debates, 9 meetings of the committee, and after that, the PTI government representatives, they just walked out of the committee, and about 34 of those were passed. But once again, fortunately or unfortunately, the report prepared by the committee and put at the floor of the 7 never was presented to the Senate, because there were forces that were...
Haider sab, 1 minute reh gaya sir. 1 minute reh gaya conclude karne ke liye.
Now, the further reforms that we want to bring, and which we have already discussed with the Honorable Chief Election Commissioner, one is that there should be a uniform criteria for qualification or disqualification of candidates, because it used to happen that a candidate was qualified at one polling in one constituency, and was disqualified at another. This was because there was no uniform criteria. Now we have also said that postal ballot should be regularized so that there should be a voters list which should be displayed to the candidates and on which the postal ballot should be decided that what is to be accepted and what is not to be accepted. But the basic point remains that of the census. It's surprising. Our time is coming, it's not up. So it's very surprising there are 145 million voters in a population of 240 million. That means only 40% of our population is below the age of 18. Now that's very encouraging from the point of view of population control. But if we take the number of voters, what it is on the basis of identity cards issued to them and the voters list, then the population of Pakistan is not less than 300 million. Now with that population, the allocation of constituency, the allocation of seats to the provinces changes. High-handed methods were used in order to reduce the population in the first phase from 300 million to 240 to 250 million. And then in the Council of Common Interest, they said if you want the elections, then the population of Pakistan is 240 million. So many things have to be taken up. And as I said earlier, that with every legislation, every legislation has been a setback for the forces of dictatorship, while it has strengthened the Election Commission of Pakistan. We have to legislate again and again, find faults with the system, and build what one honorable judges has said, firewalls against those interventions. Ladies and gentlemen, the real firewall is inside you. If you resist it, then we can have fair and free elections.
Thank you very much. बहुत शुक्रिया. हमारे पास कोई 12-13 मिनट हैं 2-3 सवालों के लिए. मेरा ख्याल है वक्त बच गया है. तो organizers, if we could take some questions. If there's a question, please kindly identify yourself, identify the person you are putting the question to, and then ask the question briefly.
My question is that in our country, political leaders have started wearing uniforms so that they can encourage the cruel people to continue with the cruelty. So do your leaders do the same? Do they wear uniforms to encourage the cruel police to continue with their cruelty? Or just wish to remind you that the Chief Minister of the Punjab, she wore police uniform to encourage the police to continue with the persecution and the cruelties. So do your leaders do the same? Do they encourage men and women in uniform to continue with the persecution and the cruelties?
Thank you.
Thank you.
John.
Let me make it absolutely clear. I totally support what Azhar said. Democracy is not just about elections, it's about the protection of human rights. For me, that means a lot of the more cleverer governments that abuse human rights have things working easily on polling day. So people might think that it's been a free and fair election because people are able to go out and vote. What matters most is what the government that is elected in that does after it's elected. It must keep faith with the electorate by implementing a program that protects and defends that country against the abuse of human rights. It also must be a government that is not in the control of corrupt forces or military forces. That government must also be in charge of its policy of defence and its military. The military should not be controlling it. It is up to the democratic government to have its defence policy and to defend that and to control the military, not the other way about. As far as the European Union is concerned, no military people, no armed forces control the elections in our country. But let me also be honest, there are a couple of members of the European Union, in my view, would need observation missions sent to their countries. Countries like Poland and Hungary, I think it's about time that the EU as a whole took serious action against countries like Poland and Hungary who are not implementing the European acquis communautaire. But nowhere throughout the European Union is there any military body or sinister forces in control of what happens in it. The European Union is very strongly internally in support and defence of human rights. My concern is it should do more when it sends European missions to defend human rights more strongly in the countries to which it sends election observation missions like Pakistan. I do not think it's acceptable that the EU sent 3 people, 3 experts to observe the 24 election. 3 people. There's no way they could adequately do that. It needs much larger missions which put forces who are trying to undermine those elections on alert that if they do try and abuse it, they'll be caught, and that the EU will implement sanctions against them, as they should have done after the 2002 election.
Thank you very much.
Hello, am I audible? Thank you so much. My name is Asadullah and I'm from District Bajor. I'm a student of political science from Punjab University. My question is from sir, what will be the punishment for a person who rig election openly? Like in my district, Bajor, there are 2 PK seats. The election were rigged openly by RO. The Form 47 was issued to another party, to Jamaat Islami, while those 2 seats were won by PTI candidates with a majority. But then the people there protested, and they protested in a very huge majority, and after a day, then the election was declared in favor of PTI. But before that, they declared election in favor of Jamaat Islami. So my question, what will be the punishment for those persons who rig election openly, especially the administrative authorities person? Thank you so much.
Thank you. There are 2 punishments. The first punishment should be in Pakistan itself. That's up to successive Pakistani governments to make sure that the law on elections prevents abuse of the electoral process and matters that flow from it. So until Pakistan has sufficient laws to guarantee the security of the democratic process, then there will always be problems. That also depends on one other thing, that the judiciary are totally independent to enforce those laws. So firstly, Pakistan should have the laws to protect human rights abuses, including strong electoral laws. And the judiciary should be independent of any interference from any other source. What the EU can then do, as I say, the mistake they made in 2002, and I will keep repeating it, there is no point sending missions, there is no point having great support for human rights acting from within the heart of the EU Commission unless you enforce them. I was annoyed that it didn't happen in 2002. Another place I was deeply involved in was monitoring Hong Kong when it was handed back to China. Okay? I was the rapporteur for that from 1997 to 2004. I supported the agreement when Hong Kong was handed back to China, that there would be a protection of the rule of law and limited democracy initially, and then full democracy, but that human rights would be protected. China, in recent years, absolutely destroyed the one country, two system. And what exists in Hong Kong now is a system which operates in mainland China. The EU did little. All it was interested in was trading relationship with Hong Kong, and once again it sacrificed human rights for its trading interests. And one thing that I wonder, in my view, China's primary objective is not to be the world's, at this point, major military power. I believe its objective is to be the world's economic power. And I think the EU should have employed massive economic and financial sanctions on China, which threatened its ability
to
become the world's economic power. And by the way, let me just finish one point. I wonder if they had have done that, would Putin have invaded Ukraine? I think Putin, when he saw China getting away with it, decided he would get away with it. And I think the failure for the EU to take strong action gives encouragement to dictators like Putin and elsewhere in the world.
Thank you. Last question, please. Yes.
Nasser Javed Gumman, I'm advocate Supreme Court. I have done a lot of work with Election Commission as in court cases, more than
आस्था बोलिए और सवाल पूछ लीजिए please.
More than 1,500 cases has been conducted by myself on election basis. My question with Mr. Taj Haider is that when the amendments were made and Election Act 2017 were made, and there is a specific provision under Article 218 and 219 of the Constitution that the Chief Election Commissioner is given the full powers of the Constitution, is the constitutional with constitutional authority. But the hindrance, I say the word use hindrance, is made by the courts by ordering the Chief Election Commission to appear before the court, and whatever the order is made by the Chief Election Commissioner, that is taken up by the court. There should be any other efficacious remedy that after whatever the decision is of RO, then the matter should not go to the High Court. It should limit the powers of the. Any other forum has been given in the constitutional framework, in the legislature.
ताज है और सब समझ गए जी.
तो if that has not been considered, मेरा सवाल ताजर साहब से ये है कि वो क्या इस चीज को कंसीडर नहीं किया गया कि ये जो बातें लेजिस्लेशन करते वक्त ये जो एप्लीकेशन रेमेडी जो है उसको बढ़ाया जाए और चीफ इलेक्शन कमीशन की पावर जो है वो उसको बुलाया ना जाए अदालतों में.
जो हमारा इलेक्शन एक्ट 2017 है उसके अंदर एक पूरा चैप्टर है सज़ाओं का, और वो सज़ाएं बहुत सख्त सज़ाएं हैं किसी भी मिसकंडक्ट के ऊपर. लेकिन 2018 के इलेक्शन में हमने देखा कि फ़ौज ने इलेक्शन एजेंटों को उठा के और पोलिंग स्टेशनों के बाहर फेंक दिया, और 78,471 जो फॉर्म 45 थे which were displayed at the website of the Election Commission of Pakistan, only 128 had valid signatures of polling agents. Now, in this condition, some remedies have to be found out. इस दफ़ा जो हम कर रहे थे और हमने जो प्रपोज़ किया था वो ये था कि तमाम कैंडिडेट्स का एक व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप बन जाए, और वो व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप जिस वक्त आप फॉर्म 45 भेजते हैं रिटर्निंग ऑफिसर को, उसी वक्त वो व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप के अंदर आप तमाम कैंडिडेट्स को भी भेज दें. ये व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप जो है आप वैसे भी कैंडिडेट्स को हिदायत देने के लिए, गाइडेंस के लिए आप इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं. वो ले आए कि जनाब हमने एक नया सॉफ्टवेयर बनाया है, अ सॉफ्टवेयर विच डायरेक्टली टॉक्स टू द सैटेलाइट्स फॉर दोज एरियाज़ विच आर नॉट विच डोंट हैव द सर्विस ऑफ इंटरनेट. अब इस किस्म की जो बातें हैं वो, लेकिन ये कि हम ये तीन चीज़ें जो मैंने अर्ज़ की, एक तो पोस्टल बैलेट, एक यूनिफॉर्म क्राइटेरिया फॉर क्वालिफिकेशन एंड डिस्क्वालिफिकेशन, एंड द थर्ड थिंग, making WhatsApp groups of candidates in every constituency and transmitting the results of polling stations directly to those candidates. मेरे ख्याल से थोड़ी बहुत रुकावट पड़ेगी, लेकिन बस चाहते हैं सो आप करें हैं हमको बस बदनाम की।
बहुत शुक्रिया ताज हैदर साहब। इसके साथ ही जो आज का वक्त है वो ख़त्म हुआ है, और मैं आसमा जहांगीर कॉन्फ्रेंस के मुंतज़मीन का और अपने तीनों पैनलिस्ट का शुक्रिया अदा करता हूँ कि उन्होंने वक्त निकाला, और आप सबका बहुत शुक्रिया कि इतने शोर और एयर कंडीशनिंग कमज़ोर होने के बावजूद आपने तवज्जो से गुफ्तगू सुनी। आपका सबका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। एंड दिस कम्स टू द एंड ऑफ दिस सेशन। थैंक यू वेरी मच।